The federal government already knows who's won the tender for one of Australia's most important infrastructure projects for decades, but it's not telling. Only once the Prime Minister returns from overseas next week will we learn who will build Australia's new telecommunications grid, the $9.4 billion national broadband network. The network will provide a pathway for old and new media platforms combined, an array of innovations that is constantly expanding, all to be delivered to 98% of Australian homes and businesses. Meanwhile, Telstra, which effectively knocked itself out of the ring, will watch from the sidelines as a whole new world of competition is unleashed against it. Of course, Telstra is not known for walking away from a fight. So, as business editor Greg Hoy reports, it's now bracing for the biggest fight of its long history.
It is a waiting game, and everyone's waiting with bated breath.
The government knows well who's won the bid to build Australia's $9.4 billion fibre optic cable or national broadband network, rolling out more than 200,000 kilometres of cable to around 22,000 new street cabinets or nodes like these. It's called the cabinetisation of Australia.
The National Broadband Network will be one of the largest infrastructure projects ever undertaken by any Australian government.
The NBN will render Telstra's old wholesale copper telephone network outdated and will eventually deliver to 98% of Australian households and businesses the capability for such techno wonders as audio-visual telephony such as this, web-based television such as these. With the limitless variety of choice the Internet of the future will deliver. And the broadband network will ultimately revolutionise information communications technologies, or ICT, for commerce, education and the provision of healthcare, particularly for regional centres.
It's as close as we can get to having the patient in our own department.
This will be the railways of the 21st century, the revolution, in my view, in this country. And we've been held back for too long by Telstra seeking to maintain its monopoly rather than seeking to grow the bigger ICT sector in terms of the sorts of services that I think will have a powerful impact on how we all live, work and play.
The Singtel Optus-led consortium is favoured to win the broadband bid, though some suggest just because it's Australian, a new and well-backed Melbourne shelf company, Acacia, headed by former Telstra executive Doug Campbell, is an outside chance, unless the government insists such competing bidders merge. But with the big winner expected to be revealed around April 7th, the biggest loser is going home. Telstra's American CEO Sol Trujillo, the $13.3 million a year man, who decided Telstra should not lodge a proper bid for the broadband network for fear Telstra would be forced to split into a wholesale and separate retail company, is now leaving his job early. The timing, he says, is sheer coincidence.
It's time for me to also prioritise some of the personal desires that I have. And, when is the right time for succession?
What Sol has done and what has happened to Telstra under his management is that we have made the critical investments that set up this company for the future. For example, we've invested in and built the world's leading national wireless broadband network. We've recently announced that we're beginning the upgrade of our cable network, which covers the 5 capital cities. We have continued to invest in high-speed broadband in our fixed network. We have made the critical investments that will make sure that Telstra is at the forefront of high-speed broadband going forward.
While some applaud his efforts, others deplore them.
Since Sol joined the company in 2005, the value of the business, what it is intrinsically worth, has declined by something in the order, we estimate, of $12 billion. The company has reduced its equity over the last 3 years. It's done that by buying back $600 million worth of shares and paying dividends of $1.8 billion in excess of the profits that it has reported.
We are able to retain our strong dividend for our shareholders. We are well on track in terms of our objective of $6 to $7 billion free cash flow in financial year 2010, and together both of those figures demonstrate how strong financially Telstra is.
Sol Trujillo himself wasn't available for interview. When he arrived 4 years ago, Telstra's share price was over $5. Today it's around the $3.30 mark. At the last general meeting, Mr Trujillo rejected analyst fears aired on the 7:30 report that Telstra would suffer significantly if its tough tactics backfired and it was left out of the national broadband process. Since that has happened, Telstra's shares have fallen around 23%. The problem for analysts now is forecasting what Australia's $36 billion telecommunications market will look like once Telstra loses its wholesale monopoly to a newcomer who will then need the cooperation of Telstra and its shareholders to survive. It seems inevitable a battle royal is looming in the High Court unless there is preemptive action taken in Parliament.
The critical issue here is giving the consortium or the player that wins the NBN tender access to Telstra's copper wires, the wires that go between a local exchange and your house.
The important thing for Telstra is in terms of the costs that we might incur as far as any interconnection with the national broadband network, that we're fully reimbursed for those costs up front.
Thank God for Phil Burgess, because Phil Burgess, who was the head of the regulatory area at Telstra last year, took the ACCC to the High Court last year, and the High Court, in a 7-0 drubbing, rejected Telstra's arguments as an artifice and superficial. So many of the legal issues, in fact, have been resolved.
The High Court did not make any blanket decision in terms of the acquisition of our property. And it remains the case that, of course, the Constitution is in play and Telstra will reserve its legal rights.
I believe the time is right for us to take on Telstra.
But one of the big issues is whether the government will, as requested by the broadband finalists, try to restrict Telstra from using or upgrading its established fixed-line network to outgun the fledgling national broadband network.
I think that it is somewhat of an outrage if a bidder who purports to support competition is actually asking for a statutory monopoly.
If there's an implied monopoly right for the NBN process, we would have quite an intense period of both industry and political debate, but also, quite likely legal and court action.
To frighten off the broadband finalists' financiers, Telstra says it will ramp up its Foxtel network cable in the battle for broadband in the cities and use its mobile broadband network to compete elsewhere, knowing full well the government's broadband solution must include a large focus on wireless and satellite technology to service remote areas.
It's a logical response, but it has no impact whatsoever on the commercial underpinnings for our proposal for a 98% coverage Australia-wide broadband network.
Indeed, some suggest the government should use the biggest stick available by legislating to separate Telstra into wholesale and retail networks to avoid the ensuing commercial and political bloodshed.
We've always said that separation is completely unnecessary. Whatever is announced by the government, it should be fully scrutinised. The fact of the matter is that this has been developed without consulting with Telstra, and it is an upgrade of Telstra's network.
If we could only get rid of that conflict of interest by forced divestiture, then competition would be a lot higher. We're sort of stuck in the situation now, and the chickens have come home to roost, if you like. The previous government in 1997, when it did T1, left us with a mess.